This is the CBS Evening News. Bob Schieffer reporting. Good evening. In a move that marks the first time the government has ever acknowledged that a nuclear weapons plant may have caused damage to the community around it, the Department of Energy has agreed to pay residents of a small Ohio town millions of dollars in damage. The case could have far-reaching impact, of course, on other communities, and Christine Negroni has our report.
In one of the few times since the government has been in the atomic weapons business, the Department of Energy has agreed to pay $73 million to as many as 14,000 people living within 5 miles of the Fernald uranium processing plant in Ohio. While the government admitted no wrongdoing, it acknowledged the plant may have harmed nearby residents.
I think this shows the world, people across the country, that the DOE was wrong.
The award is the result of a $300 million class action suit brought by the residents against National Lead of Ohio, the company that ran the plant for the government for 32 years and admitted releasing 380,000 pounds of uranium dust into the air.
When you're in a wrong, you have to pay, and they had to pay. That's the name of the game.
In a non-binding summary trial 3 weeks ago, attorneys for the residents argued that the release of radioactive materials into the air and water had caused mental stress and reduced property values in the community.
People do not want to live next door to a facility such as NLO. That's the bottom line.
But government attorneys claimed the residents could not show that the stress was caused by the plant. Nevertheless, DOE and the residents agreed to an out-of-court settlement after a jury in a non-binding verdict indicated it would side with the residents.
DOE is settling for $73 million, but that's a good settlement, and it shows a complete change of attitude in DOE.
Lawyers in the case expect part of the money will pay for studies to monitor the effects of the plant on the health of the community. Christine Negroni, CBS News, Chicago.
President Bush is taking the holiday weekend at his vacation home in Maine, but it's not working out in exactly the way his neighbors had hoped. Wyatt Andrews now with more on that.
It could be the one presidential promise the residents of Kennebunkport wish George Bush had never kept. He told them he would cause the town as little trouble as possible, a vow some wish he would break because business this year has been so slow.
One of the local artists was mentioning that during the visit of President Mitterrand that she only had 11 people come through her store.
George Bush was supposed to become a cottage industry here. Thousands would flock to buy George Bush coffee mugs, dish towels, plates, or bronze medallions. Kennebunkport was ready. The common wisdom now in Kennebunkport blames the slow season on the very stories that predicted the coming boom. It's just that all those projections of success also projected chaos.
Crowded streets.
It's bumper to bumper. Don't bother coming, it's too crowded.
Now that none of that has happened, many local businesses are scrambling for sales just like always.
The fact that George Bush has a summer home here does not mean that we can all vacation and buy the new homes and buy the new cars and just run. My job has become running to the bank 24 hours a day. That's not true.
The president's only minor tiff is with the police, who complained that manning the checkpoints near his home costs $1,500 per shift. The White House says there is no way to repay that under existing law. Outside of that, George Bush, even as president, has had very little impact on his lifetime vacation hometown, to the chagrin of those shopkeepers who just wish he'd help them sell a few more of those George Bush masks. Wyatt Andrews, CBS News, Kennebunkport, Maine.
This is also July 1st, which is the traditional time that when many new laws go into effect. And among the laws taking effect today is one aimed at encouraging the millions of Americans who are eligible for food stamps to use them. Richard Schlesinger reports.
She stopped for it.
By her own admission, Rose Sheffield, a 34-year-old divorced mother of 2, is stubborn.
Yeah, right.
She gets by on $8,000 a year. She is eligible for food stamps, but refuses to get them.
Out at home.
When I became a single parent, by my choice, I was determined to stand on my 2 feet. I wasn't going to have the state of Vermont supporting my children.
1/3 of the 34 million Americans eligible for food stamps do not use them.
While most people have heard of the food stamp program, many Americans who are eligible don't realize they're eligible. They mistakenly think it's not for them.
The federal government would like to reach the working poor who need help. Today, Washington revived a program to help publicize food stamps.
We certainly would encourage anyone who feels the need for assistance to apply.
So you want chocolate or vanilla?
But 25% of the eligible people who are not using food stamps already know they could get help. But like Rose Sheffield, they don't think they should.
$3.50.
We did have food stamps when we were kids. And I was totally embarrassed to go shopping with my father because he whipped out these food stamps.
To reach people like Rose Sheffield and others who could use food stamps, Vermont community outreach workers will apply for part of the newly available federal money. To a large extent, theirs is a sales job.
You wouldn't balk at cashing in on your Blue Cross Blue Shield insurance, so why not on the government tax dollars that you've paid in when you need the help?
Across the country, social workers are learning a hard lesson.
I would rather go up and stand against that wall and beat my head than to have somebody come and say, here, this is yours.
Spreading the word about food stamps is one problem. Convincing people to use them is another. Richard Schlesinger, CBS News, New York.
Test results are in on the 600-year-old oak tree in Austin, Texas. It was deliberately poisoned. Experts said today they've never seen so much poison in a tree that was still alive. But they are encouraged that it is still producing new growth. And as workers try to save the tree, the public is preserving its legacy by adopting seedlings from the giant oak. Still ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, the reopening of China's Tiananmen Square for a select few, and later Pentagon budget cutbacks and the battle over which military programs will fly.
I eat nutritious meals with plenty of fruit.
China's rulers celebrated a major anniversary in Tiananmen Square today, but the guest list was highly selective. David Jackson in Beijing has our satellite report, which was received here, as you'll see, only after Chinese government censors interrupted our transmission.
The Chinese Communist Party celebrated its 68th birthday today, and the park next to Tiananmen Square opened for the first time since the bloodshed there. But memories are fresh and there's no crush to get in. Premier Li Peng invited a visiting Cerritos, California city councilman by for a chat and apparently mentioned the disgraced former party boss, Zhao Ziyang.
And that nothing's happened to him, that he's not under arrest. He didn't mention he's under arrest or not. He said, well, he's still in his house. He's still living here.
All over China, the party's anniversary is getting extra attention this year, and the army is given center stage, perhaps trying to cleanse a badly tarnished image. But martial law still reigns, and city government officials even had trouble getting foreign reporters past edgy guards for an approved tour of Tiananmen Square. There is still a lot of cleanup yet to do. There are still reminders of the student movement. The characters say Nankai University, among the scars left by tracked vehicles.
The square itself is still closed to the public. Soldiers are keeping the people out. Aware perhaps that just one unauthorized memorial wreath left off here could lead to hundreds or thousands for the civilians the government insists weren't killed here that night 4 weeks ago. David Jackson, CBS News, Tiananmen Square, Beijing.
Many foreign business people left China after the bloodshed in Beijing, but those from one country in particular didn't stay home very long. Bill Whitaker now with more on that.
Almost before the smoke had cleared, Japanese business people were back in China, picking up the deals they dropped following the massacre in Tiananmen Square. So many are returning so soon, critics say the Japanese bought round-trip tickets when they fled Beijing last month. We have a joint venture. That's why I came back early, says this man, but he refused to give his name. The Japanese government has urged returnees to be discreet.
The Japanese have their own values, and those values right now, at least, are purely economic.
With $2 billion invested in China, Japan has taken a bottom-line approach to events there. It was only after Japan's foreign minister went to Washington this week that Japan decided to bow to pressure and join Western leaders in denouncing China at this month's economic summit in Paris. Japan calls all the criticism unfair. Many here also call the criticism naive, Severing business ties, say some Japanese, would only serve to isolate China and bring unrest to the region.
Because of the sheer importance of the two countries in this region, the deterioration of the relations would no doubt harm the entire region.
But many critics call that a convenient excuse for business as usual, one that's been used before. As many Western nations cut economic ties with South Africa, Japan saw a business opportunity.
When the United States, Great Britain, or any other Western powers move out, Japan will go in. It is their day-to-day way of doing business.
China's leaders say they want to see who their real friends are. Japan, it seems, wants to leave no doubt. Bill Whitaker, CBS News, Tokyo.
Violence erupted when police tried to break up an allegedly illegal community meeting today in the South African black homeland. At least 9 policemen and 2 civilians were killed. 4 of the policemen died when their armored personnel carrier was firebombed.
For many generations, oat bran has been a natural part of their breakfast, a breakfast now known as Kellogg's Mueslix. Oats and wheat ripened in their own sweet time, fruit and nuts warmed by the summer sun. How fortunate we've rediscovered what they knew all along. Kellogg's Mueslix with oat bran, what breakfast was meant to be.
Once said that running the Pentagon would be a simple matter if the military had nothing to do but fight the nation's wars. But the defense establishment has become so large, its actions sometimes have more impact on the nation's economy than they do on national security. There was a graphic example of that this week. It's the focus tonight of our Washington Notebook.
It's the fighter the Navy calls its Top Gun. America needs the F-14.
The commercials were on the airwaves all week and in the major newspapers, reminding taxpayers of the vital need for these weapons in the national defense. The timing was coincidental, the manufacturers insisted, but to one defense contractor, the circumstances were no less than life-threatening.
What is at stake is the premier aircraft of the United States Navy. Without the F-14, Grumman will certainly go out of the aircraft manufacturing business.
It was up or down week in Washington as the powerful House Armed Services Committee decided which weapons to buy with its $64 billion budget. The Bush administration was pushing its own plan, which included eliminating several weapons, including Grumman's F-14 jet, built in one committee member's district.
We are today going to decide the fate of naval aviation into the next century, as well as whether a company called Grumman is going to survive or die.
The F-14 was high on the administration's cut list, as was a new tilt rotor craft that takes off like a helicopter but flies like a fixed-wing plane, a weapon which has the strong support of congressmen from Texas, where it is built. In an interview with Pentagon correspondent David Martin, the new defense secretary called such weapons pet rocks.
The pet rock is a item in the budget that is not essential, given the fact that we've got tight budgets and that ought to be eliminated, but that is kept in for essentially political purposes.
Did you have pet rocks when you were a member of Congress?
Of course not. Sure, everybody's got pet rocks, I suppose, as a member of Congress. Everybody has systems they support. By summertime, they've all got add-ons they want to put back into the budget, things they want to spend that affect their districts. That's a bad way for us to budget, especially in the defense area.
But one man's pet rock is another's weapon of choice, and this week the Armed Services Committee said it will ask Congress to take some of the money from a program to develop a new bomber the administration wants in order to restore funding for the weapons the committee wants. Cheney, who's seen the process as both an administration official and a congressman, understands why it happens, but he says it just underscores the difficulty of cutting the Pentagon budget.
If you're going to cut the overall level of spending for defense, then it's important that you eliminate programs, you shut down production lines, you close bases, that you actually make clean cuts. Unless we make those clean choices, we totally foul up the entire system. We end up in a situation where, for example, you pay twice as much for an airplane as it would otherwise cost.
Trying to correct that situation is one of the driving reasons for a new administration plan to restructure the top levels of the Pentagon bureaucracy. David Martin has been given the details of that proposal and reports on that in part 2 of our report.
Making good on a campaign promise, President Bush has approved a plan to overhaul the management of the Pentagon so that weapons do not take so long and cost so much to build. Among other things, the plan would require more thorough testing of weapons before they are purchased in large quantities. A case in point, the B-1 bomber. The Pentagon was committed to buying 100 B-1s for $28 billion before it discovered faults in the electronic system. It would also direct the armed services to buy commercially available items rather than designing and building their own. Pentagon officials estimate buying microchips off the shelf would save $1 billion a year.
Nearly half the 21,000 people with authority to sign contracts on behalf of the Defense Department do not have a college education. So the plan calls for the creation of schools like the National War College here, but instead of war, these new schools would teach sound business practices.
All told, there are 580,000 people involved in the purchasing of weapons. The plan approved by the president calls for reducing the size of that bureaucracy by 15%, saving an estimated $7.5 billion a year. But it won't happen without help from Congress.
Congress is responsible for a lot of what goes on down here, and to the extent that they have imposed a lot of requirements over the years, it's very expensive for us to meet those requirements. We end up with layers of bureaucracy and paperwork and rules and regulations in order to comply with congressional requirements, when if we could cut away some of that underbrush, if you will, we might be able to do our job more efficiently.
All of these changes have been recommended before, but no Secretary of Defense has been able to make them stick. Officials expect resistance from the uniformed services because parts of this plan would force them to relinquish power to the civilians who, in theory but not in practice, run the Pentagon. David Martin, CBS News, the Pentagon.